I want to do 2 or 3 things in the next hour or so, and then we'll really look at resistance. And we're also going to look at how we internalize this, how this lives in us, in our actions, in our behavior. But first, we need to do a little history. So I want to do Paul's 10-minute version of 1,700 years of Christian history, because there are some things that, you know, like we said earlier, that when President Bush said the word crusades, you know, that immediately had resonance. It had resonance for Christians, but in the entire rest of the world shuddered as well, because that is not an ancient concept or an ancient historical event. It's the culmination of 1,000 years of history around that. Same thing with Inquisition or witch burnings or things like that. So we have to understand a little bit of that history to understand where we are now and what's going on. So let's start at the beginning. The people who wrote about him wrote decades later, and those were based on oral testimony of people who knew people who knew people who maybe knew him. That was in different languages than the language and the culture in which he was supposed to have lived. And those versions, and there were multiple versions, were whittled down and edited, and a lot of it was thrown out, and it was consolidated into what we now have as an official New Testament, right? But anyway, it was the early Christian communities were very diverse, based in, like I said, North Africa, West Asia. Women had very powerful roles in the communities as leaders. There was a lot of heterodoxy. There was a lot of variety of interpretations of what it meant to be Christian. And many of those sects were very closely aligned with Jewish groups as well, and many of them considered themselves Jewish groups. It was only after a couple of hundred years that Christians started to kind of differentiate themselves from Jews and to actually, instead of trying to convert Jews, trying to convert non-Jews to Christianity. And that's the culture that the Gospels came out of. What was really significant was the 4th century, where Constantine, the emperor of the Roman Empire, claimed to have a vision the night before a major battle in which he saw a cross emblazoned in light, and it said, in this conquer, or something. I forget the exact phrase, the Latin phrase, but it was something about, you will conquer with this. And so he had all of his troops put a cross on their uniforms, costumes, dress, and they went out and they won the battle. Nobody knows if this all happened. I mean, he did win the battle, but nobody knows the rest of it. So, again, there's layers and layers of stories we tell about this early history, and there's a lot of controversy about what was true and what wasn't. But anyway, he decided, therefore, he converted to Christianity and said that Christianity would now be an official religion of the Roman Empire. Over the next 50 or 60 years, other emperors came along, and pretty soon Christianity was not just another religion, official religion. It became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And by about 380, that's often given the time, that it became the only acceptable religion of the Roman Empire. And in that year, between 380 and 381, because of conflict within the Roman Empire, the emperor and Christian leaders got together and decided that there was a certain set of beliefs that were the official Orthodox Christian beliefs, and all other versions of Christianity were anathema, were wrong, dangerous, and intolerable. And there's actually a book that's called 381, The Closing of the Western Mind, because this established the permission to Christians to go out and destroy all of the books, all of the libraries, all of the churches of other people who were Christians but had the non-Orthodox versions, and to persecute and harass and in some ways kill those Christians, communities throughout West Asia, North Africa, Southern Europe. The difference between those sects in many cases was minute because it was about different versions of the Trinity and the relationship between the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. And so these weren't even major controversies. I mean, the version of orthodoxy was so strict that a whole lot of people who were Christians of a very close nature to the Orthodox were excluded. So anyway, this was a tremendously important period because Christianity now became the official dominant religion of a declining empire. Rome was not destroyed for another couple of hundred years, but it was already declining. So whereas Rome, the Roman Empire itself, declined, Christianity grew more powerful. Also in the 4th century, Augustine, who was a North African bishop, began writing what became very influential texts about what it meant to be Christian. And he took this concept of cosmic battle of good and evil, and he took it to mean our internal struggles around the evil inside of us, the sinfulness inside of us. He was very misogynistic, and so the church began to exclude women from any role within the church. And at this point, the persecution of Jews became very overt and formal in terms of canon law and in terms of practices within the church. So over the next several hundred years, Jews were systematically demoted in terms of civil rights and human rights, and Christians gained more and more privileges being Christian. And this happened during the period that's the church grew more powerful because there was no other centralized authority. And even the church wasn't that centralized, it wasn't that strong in much of this period. But still, the main part of the church was in West Asia, the Eastern Church, based in Constantinople. The main thing that I think we need to move to is a really pivotal period that began in about the 10th century. And 3 things happened during that period that were really crucial for our lives today. One was that the Pope, Christians were fighting each other a lot in Europe. And the Pope wanted to create peace among Christians. So he declared a war, a holy war, against Islam in order to reclaim the Holy Land. Jerusalem, in particular, was the prize. So this was the first colonial expedition of Europeans, in that sense, outside of Europe. It created the mobilization of Europe, a vast mobilization, hundreds of thousands of people, all under an identity as being Christian and as part of a Christian empire, Christendom it was called, against a common enemy. It was all defined in terms of this common enemy. Now I noticed somebody put up there the Crusades, 950 to 1200. The Crusades actually lasted for 600 years. The first was in 1095, the last was in 1699. The Crusades were a long series of intermittent wars, some of whose goals were to reclaim the Holy Land, some of whose goals were to wipe out heretical alternative Christian communities in Europe, like the Cathars, the Albigensians, and people like that. Some of it was attacks on particular nobles and ruling classes in Europe. It was a term that became used fairly loosely by the Christian hierarchy to target individuals, areas, all kinds of enterprises. But that meant that these wars continued on and off and devastated communities throughout Europe. So for a very, very long period of time, 600 years, if you think about it, and in that entire time, Islam was demonized. Islam was the core enemy. But because Jews had been tarred with the accusation of killing God, of disbelieving in Jesus and leading to his death, i.e. killing God, the Jews were also killed and victimized and persecuted during this period. And in fact, the first crusade, most of the crusaders never made it to the Holy Land, but they went through parts of Europe and destroyed the Jewish communities because they were the immediate enemy. And they were much more close and at hand than Muslims in the, Palestine and Israel, that area.